we want to ensure that going away from today, everybody has some key tricks and things that they can ensure they know before they meet the investor for the first time that allows them to, get through that door. And here's the obligatory slide on Triple Point. So we've been around for 14 years and we've backed some pretty good companies. Lend Invest we backed right at the beginning. In fact, they were called something else at the time, Montello, and some other companies there as well. Skin Analytics won the award for best investment in AI last year at the British Angel Awards. So, but talking about the deck now and talking about the pitch. Now, they're two separate things, and it's very important that the deck works and dovetails well with the pitch. And that sounds obvious, but has anybody here raised funding yet for their business? Yeah, some. And has anybody done a Series A rather than just seed or angel round? Okay, so one person it looks like, and you will have learned that the longer the funding round goes on for, the more the business changes in that time, and the more the story, the narrative that you sell may change from what the deck is like at the beginning. And you might continue having conversations with an investor, and the deck at day one and the stats and the metrics in that deck at day one look very different from what the company's actually doing in month 3. And then you can have quite an interesting conversation with the investor when you're either explaining why the metrics didn't quite match what you said you'd do in 3 months' time, or a really comfortable conversation where you're talking about how you've exceeded those metrics. And so to prevent or to mitigate the chance of that situation happening, one must always think when they're putting the deck together, how can I ensure that this deck has some degree of longevity? And how can I ensure that my deck tells a story in a way that ensures the investor, when they read it, picks up within 3 or 4 minutes what the company does, how you're solving the issue that you're solving, why it's an issue, and how you're proving that you have some degree of product market fit. And at the angel stage, that pre-seed stage, you don't need to have that product market fit. You do have to have why your business is doing what it's doing, but you don't need to have the product market fit. As soon as you get to seed stage, which I would consider to be anything over £150,000 of annual revenues and above, you need to have quite clear reasons why you've got some early product market fit. And I toiled long and hard yesterday thinking, well, how can I provide the best skeleton for a pitch deck? But then I realized that Sequoia in the US, who have a lot more time than we all have put together this already in a pitch deck, which you can Google online, and I'd recommend that to anybody. And effectively, this is a really good storytelling that a company can do through their deck. Because a lot of people, when you're putting your deck together for the first time, you don't know what to begin with first. You don't know where to put the financials. You don't know where to talk about the product in detail. You also don't know how much to put in each deck. How much time is that investor going to spend reading that deck? If the deck doesn't hit the right notes, you don't get the meeting. And everybody deserves a meeting. So I think the key, I'm not going to talk through that in detail. I'd be more than happy to share this deck, and particularly if you can't find it, the Sequoia deck, which is a bit more enlarged than this, later or tomorrow if you want to email me. But just what I want to take away here is the first 3 or 4 things, from problem down to market size. Because that just shows the heuristics of an investor when they're reading your deck. What's the problem, the solution, why now, and the market size? And if you can show in a minute what your problem is, you'll probably get a meeting. And if you've been sending decks out and you haven't been getting meetings, that's probably what's wrong in your deck. And only once you've told that, can you then go on and decide, is there a deal that's happening or not? And when you're putting that deck together and you're thinking about those things, there are some key. What I was doing yesterday was working back off the companies we've seen, and we've seen. It's fantastic. The London scene's exploding. We've seen 1,000 companies in the last 7 months, and we've invested in 8 of them. So we're well below the stats for what the average number of companies to investment is. And those that we've seen, what did they do right? And what I realized was there is definitely bias and heuristics, and it all comes down to that. I mean, my colleagues would shoot me for it, but it all comes down to that first meeting where you're going, are they ticking the boxes? Because that's where you get eliminated, where people haven't invested too much time. And so they can say no. And so I just want to go through 3 or 4 things that I noticed the companies that all got investment did well, and many of the companies who didn't get investment didn't do at least one of those things well. So the first thing, and it dovetails very nicely with Dan's speech, was concisely answering what your value proposition is. And when I wrote that in bold, I then reflected on it. I thought, well, what is a value proposition? Because everybody says it, but it is just that, promise to your customer. What do you promise to your customer that makes you better? And if you can't articulate that in one slide, then how does an investor have confidence that you can sell your product? So I don't want to dwell on it more than that, but just think, if you can't articulate it in one slide, then you start to raise questions about how you can sell your product. The second thing that I thought about was describing the market size. And this is a big one because it's not so much a tick box for you get investment, but it's a really easy no. And a lot of people just are not told what investors are looking for. And so they typically go and they look at TAM, which is the total addressable market. It's the Gartner report. It's we're in the top right quadrant for Gartner. And they rarely, if ever, look at SAM or SOM. And SAM is the serviceable addressable market and the serviceable obtainable market. And then if you were to really look at those and think, well, what's important, it should look more like when you're putting your deck together, something like that. So the TAM is the big number. And you can definitely include that, but that should not be the only thing. It should be definitely a nod and move on. The real focus needs to be the SOM. The SOM tells the investor whether you understand your market, what you're planning to do for the next 2 or 3 years, and I'll explain what SOM is in a second, and how you see yourself growing. And a SOM is effectively your serviceable addressable market. So if you're a UK business and you're thinking about focusing on Europe, then your SAM is your bottom up, so the pricing of your product times by the number of potential customers in the regions you will operate in, potentially ever, but in the next 5 years, say. And it needs to be bottom up. It needs to be based on your pricing. And it doesn't hurt to have a slide which even says you've sized your market based on this pricing times this number of people. I mean, that is like gold standard. And that's really key because when it comes to scaling your business, you'll be thinking about this anyway. You're thinking, how big is my market opportunity? Which countries should I go to? Or if you're in the UK, which segment should I target? You've already done this sizing, but the investor just needs to see you've done it. And the SOM is your SAM on a shorter term basis. It's your obtainable market. It's what you're going to do in the next year or two. And so if you're focusing on your SAM and your SOM, which are both bottom up, based pricing times clients, rather than your TAM, which is from a report top down, often irrelevant, actually, then you've gone a major step towards A, showing you understand your business from a metrics and a granular perspective, and B, I've often worked with early stage pre-Series A companies, and they've found it really a great exercise for clarifying who and where they are going to be targeting their business. So it's worth doing aside from a deck, but definitely focus on that SAM and SOM. The next thing you need to show is, one of the best pitches that I saw recently, I was sitting on Tech Nation, if you know them. They have a cyber program, and I was sitting on the judging panel for that. And And I suddenly had this realization. I was like, oh my goodness, everybody talks about having a good value proposition, et cetera, but what really gives someone comfort is domain expertise. And one company said I was the CISO for BAE Systems. And I was like, oh my God, you must know what you're talking about. I cannot claim, possibly, and no VC can claim to have that level of domain expertise. And so you should definitely show either domain expertise, relevant expertise, or if you don't have that, research. And just to split, what do I mean by relevant experience here? I said relevant expertise, I meant relevant experience. So domain expertise is where you've been someone sufficiently senior in a business that you really understand that market. You've seen the problem. You were an HR professional back in the 80s when HR systems were in files, and you've gone off and created a computerized personnel database system. That is domain expertise. Next is relevant experience. You're not the guy who was the budget holder. You know it's an issue, but maybe your bosses haven't realized it. You could be slightly, a year, 2 years ahead of the curve with your idea, but because you might be younger, you might see something from a different perspective. You weren't the budget holder fundamentally, but you have experience in that area. And research is you've come from a different area. You typically see that I was an investment banker, consultant, lawyer, accountant. I left my job and I started a business, but I did this research. All of those are credible. In that order is how useful they are. But you should definitely have that in your deck. And on the team slide, don't be afraid in your deck to only mention the 2 or 3 people in the business that have domain expertise. And that should be the CEO, CTO, COO, or CEO, CTO, CMO, whoever it may be. But you don't need to mention 8 people. Don't need to mention your advisors. Advisors are often discounted. You might speak to them once every 6 months. But the team with domain expertise is key. So make sure you've got that. And you'll have that if you're scaling. If you're scaling right at the beginning, you might not have it. You might just have research. But you'll very quickly identify your weaknesses and be trying to hire more people that have that expertise. And if they're one of your 3 most knowledgeable people in the area, when you hire them, they should be in that slide, that team slide. And the reason is to validate your problem. And then the last, I think this is the last thing in the pitch deck to kind of talk about when you're going for investment, when you're looking to scale, is ensure you have a coherent sales and marketing strategy. And this isn't necessarily something that can be built out in one slide, and it's often something that you have a discussion about, and it's something that changes a lot. But the key things that an investor cares about is not who you're using, which creative agency, or what your brand campaign is going to look like. But it's really 3 things. It's how will you generate your leads, how much will you pay for those leads, and how will you progress, filter, or define those leads. And number 1 is absolutely key, because we'll get onto it in a second, because I'm going to do what Dan didn't do. I'm going to throw some metrics at you that you should definitely be thinking about, including what a VC is looking for as a threshold. So if you're hitting those, you're probably doing well. If not, you need to work harder, or work a bit more, maybe refine your value proposition in order to ensure that you can attract investment more quickly. But number 1, how do you generate your leads? That's got to be either content marketing if you're, say, a consumer business. It could be paid advertising with AdWords. It could be you've got external lead generation company. How much will you pay for your leads? That's really your CAC analysis. We'll get onto in a little bit. But you really have to understand how much are you willing to pay before your unit economics get undermined. And the third thing is, once you've got potential leads, prospects in your pipeline, how are you going to segment your pipeline? At what point, who in your business is going to be dealing with it? At the beginning, it'll be you doing everything. And as you progress, it will hopefully be someone else doing everything. But ultimately, it's understanding how quickly people move through the pipeline and what they're doing. And if you can answer those 3 things, that gives the VC a confidence, the investor confidence that you understand where you're going. We're not expecting you to say, oh, we're doing content marketing now, and in 2 years' time it'll still be content marketing, or it will be changing to this, because you just don't know that. But it really comes down to how are you generating leads, and sales and marketing is key to that. So those are the key things to bring out in the deck story and also talk about. And I just put this here again just because I found it on the internet. So I thought I'd plagiarise. Probably should put Sequoia's logo at the bottom. But at least I've given them some credit. Right, so now what I want to do is talk about when you're scaling, what metrics should you be looking at? Because the metrics you're looking at, to me, are the key differentiator between a good founder and a bad founder. The best founders, and this is something that before I started my first business, before I got into VC, I never really understood. But everyone talks about the CEO as an ethereal character. And they talk about the CEO as being somebody who's always big thinking. He might be sitting on his island somewhere thinking up the next big strategy idea, and then his team implements. Now that's very different to what a founder is, and it's very different to what a good founder is. A good founder is extremely detail oriented. They're in every single piece of information. If we're in a pitch meeting and we ask somebody their metric and they say, I don't know, then we're obviously fine with it. If they say, we'll get back to you, we've got that written down somewhere. You don't have to know it all off the top of your head. But if they're like, you can see when they haven't really been calculating it. If I say, what's your, a really basic one, CAC payback, then, and someone goes, I don't know, what's that? Then it immediately rings bells. What are they tracking? Like, do they understand what really gets their company going at a deeper level? And so these are just some metrics that you need to know, absolutely, ideally by memory, if not, very quick reference for when you're going to pitch to an investor. And if you know these, by the way, and if you're following everything in this deck, I genuinely think you're probably in the top 15% of companies at the pre-Series A stage. So if you don't have them, this is not to say anybody's bad or anything like that. It's just that some people, what I found is I had to be told this when I had my company. So at some point you're told it. And so I'm hoping that I'm going to be teaching everybody here to suck eggs a bit. The first thing is revenue. Sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? What I mean by revenue is MRR, ARR, net revenue. What I don't mean by this is AOV or platform revenue. The reason why revenue is important is because it's the number one heuristic for a VC. If you want to get to Series A, you'll regularly hear them reeling off that, you need to get to £1 million annual recurring revenue. Why is it £1 million? I don't know. But it's a heuristic in the industry. Similarly, for Triple Point, when we're looking at seed businesses, we say, if you've got less than 150 grand annual recurring revenue, we won't look at it. It's really arbitrary, but it's just a quick way of segmenting the businesses you're looking at. So that sounds great, but then you have companies who say, okay, so I've got platform revenue of 10 million quid. And you go, wow, that's great. And you're raising a seed round. And then you realize that actually their platform margin, or what they call net revenue, is close to zero. I can make a £20 million company tomorrow by selling Prada goods for ASOS prices. But it doesn't mean that I'm a scalable business. Okay, and so just focusing on that monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, or net revenue when you're talking about revenue, and make sure that's in there in the financial slide and you know that off by heart. Now, that's so obvious. I know you guys will have that. The next one is net MRR, monthly revenue growth rate. And this is the holy grail. This is the one that when people are talking about scaling, this is the metric. If you're scaling effectively, this metric's going up aggressively. If you're not scaling effectively, this metric is not changing or is going up slowly. And so if there's one takeaway from today, it's that number is what the VC or investor will be looking at when you're at scale-up stage. And the net MRR monthly growth rate is just the change in net MRR divided by the net MRR at the beginning of the month or the year or whatever it may be, normally month. And you're looking for that 20% growth. But importantly, and we'll get into it, we can get into it, maybe get into it now, but net MRR, or net monthly recurring revenue, or net revenue, monthly revenue, if that's your number, is not just the money that you're earning that month. It's actually quite a long and complex formula, which is, I've got it written down here, existing MRR plus new business plus reactivation plus expansion minus churn, minus contraction. And so it's quite a detailed number, and it's a lot bigger than the revenue you've earned this month versus last month. it involves looking at what revenue you've had before, the customers you've had before, what those customers are doing. Are you upselling them? Are they churning? And what new customers are you bringing on? Again, I hope that this one is really obvious. The next one is LTV, CAC, and CAC payback. And most people know this, but they don't know the heuristic that the VCs are using. So LTV, lifetime value of your customer. Your lifetime value of your customer, particularly when you're very early stage, pre-Series A, is almost impossible to define. How long have you had your customer? It might be a matter of months. The key way of determining what your LTV is either to go with the length of the contract, if you're a B2B business or you're a large-scale B2C business, but normally B2C is monthly contracts anyway, or a year. That is the best number, a year. Only go above a year if you have found that your customers stay longer than a year, which you may not have found at this stage of your business, or that your contracts with your businesses are significantly longer than a year, 2 years, 3 years. And that's probably number one, because a lot of people, what they say is they come into a meeting and they say, I'm scaling, my customer pays £100 a year, but we keep them for 5 years, or we have a churn rate now of 1%, so we'll keep them for 50 years or whatever. And we're like, no, that's not how it works. It's 1 year. And the reason for that is the tighter you are on that number, the better your unit economics are, means the more profitable you'll be in the long run, which means the more attractive you are to a VC. And the number everybody's looking for here is greater than 3 times. Your customer acquisition cost should be no bigger than 3 times your lifetime value of your customer. And ideally, your 12-month lifetime value of your customer. 24, 36, fine, but 3 times or more. And there's an entrepreneur called, and a VC called David Skock, and he has a website called For Entrepreneurs, and he has a phenomenal article on this. And the CAC payback should be less than 12 months. So you should be finding customers and within 12 months paying back all the money you spent to acquire that customer. And the tighter you are on your CAC, i.e. the more money you put into your CAC, obviously the higher the CAC payback will be, but if you can keep it under 12 months, that's great. To give you some best in class, to give you some stats from top businesses we've backed, we've seen LTV CACs of 9, 10 times of 1 year and CAC paybacks of 2 months. And they've been like our top in class companies. And the next 2 metrics that are general, which as an early stage business, I think are probably the most important metrics alongside the net MRR growth, is lead velocity rate and lead customer rate. And that's really talking about your funnel. And lead velocity rate is how many leads are you generating a month or a year or a period. And that typically needs to be a lot. You need if you've got revenue projections, you need roughly 6 times the pipeline to the revenue projections that you are giving. And that is something that in DD comes out quite quickly. As I said, if you don't do this, don't worry, loads don't. But if you do this, you're in that top decile. Okay, so if you've got 6 times the number of prospects, 6 times prospects to projected revenue, there is a high confidence rate that you'll get, to that revenue number you're projecting. And particularly if your revenue projections go 400 grand, 4.6 million, 25 million, and yet your pipeline does not indicate that you have anything close to 4 million in prospects, that's normally a sign that somebody is not going to grow as quickly as they say. And the second thing is the lead to customer rate. You guys should be monitoring this, but it's how quickly you can bring a lead into your pipeline and either convert them or bin them. If you're taking a lot longer to bin customers than your average customer you win, then you're not binning quick enough. These 2 I've found with the really early stage businesses have been the really helpful ones, the ones that I personally, when I have my business, was really focusing on, because everything kind of stems from this onwards, this and MRR. And then just some specific things for thinking about. I'm not going to go into in a lot of detail, but these are just some other metrics that that are really important. We've touched on a couple of them, but the one I'll draw out there, because it's less mathematical, is the customer engagement score. And the customer engagement score is really important for an early stage business because it goes to the heart of whether you've got product market fit. If you've sold your product, how often should it be used? And I don't know the answer to that. Every product has a different expected usage rate. But if your customer engagement is lower than what you would expect a good user to be I guess, using, then there's something that needs to change in your product. And Facebook did this fantastically, right? They're famous for their notifications and the addictivity of their website and their app, etc. And it's all about customer engagement. So just make it, and that score is something you make up. There's no set formula for how you score it. It's got to be how your product relates to how you expect, and usage relates to how you expect that product to be used. And it's got to be a really critical in the sense of harsh internal scoring, so that you guys are pushing yourself to achieve. Now, if you think about, I'll put that there just because it's all it gets a bit complicated. And if you can take away those key messages on the deck, and you can take away the idea that you need to be in the metrics, then by the time you're coming to raise your seed or Series A, you will be in that top decile. Because if your metrics look bad and you know them, you will be aggressively trying to improve them. And if they look good, you'll be going into your meetings with such confidence because you just know you're hitting all those targets. And those are the key things to be thinking about. And there was, Dan talked about vanity metrics, clicks, views, platform revenue, new product features added. All of that is not relevant to growth. It's important in the sense of servicing your customer, but it's not important if it doesn't hit your financial metrics, because that is what business is about, financial metrics at the end of the day. And it sounds really brutal, but I guess that is what it's all about. And even if you're a lifestyle business, it's still about making enough money to keep yourself going. And often what you see is people are very keen to improve the product in the early stage, the pre-Series A. They feel that it's not quite ready. They delay the sales. They keep trying to work on product features. But each product feature you work on should lead to one of expansion MRR, which means a sale to an existing customer or a more value to an existing customer, a reduction in churn, or a new customer. If product features don't lead to one of those three things, then it's a falsity. You don't need that product feature. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you release a product feature and next month you need to see improved metrics. But over the time period you expect it to feed through, you should see some degree of improvement from every product feature that you work on. And so those metrics are definitely not vanity metrics. Those are all the key metrics. And then so sorry for that big information dump. Happy to talk to anybody about that if that'd be interesting. But they are the backbone of scaling the business from a financial perspective. And then, what if it goes wrong? What if you're pitching to an investor and what I said at the beginning happens? Your deck projections don't quite look how the actuals turn out over the period you're raising, or you end up in a situation where you really screw things up. You do a down round with some angels. You have to come to investors and explain it. What do you do when it's just not the nice story? And the real answer is be honest. There's no science to it. It's go in there and say this happened, because if you don't say it, they'll find out and they'll be like, oh, they're hiding it. And the second thing is have a reason it happened and a solution. And you don't have to have solved it, but at least know where your issue is. Because there's nothing worse than say we had a company that was a fantastic company, because we're a seed business and we've got two funds, a B2B fund and an impact fund. And in our impact fund, it's still venture, but it's looking at health, it's looking at circular economy. So you see some brilliant businesses. And one business there, I just wanted to love them, but the problem was they didn't have sustainable unit economics. They were paying a lot more for their customers than they were earning from them, and when I said this was an issue, first of all we had to do a lot of financial analysis to even dig down to find that was an issue, and then when they said that, they said, oh well, we don't know, we didn't know that was an issue, and so you obviously at that point you say, well, it was lovely to meet and best of luck. It's not mean. It's just that the best founders, as soon as they see a problem, they're thinking about a solution. In fact, you're probably all thinking about solutions to problems you don't even have yet, and that is the mark of the best founder. That attention to detail, always thinking about the problem. And when you've hit a headwind, that's actually a sign of resilience. That's a sign of indication that you can be successful in the future if you've managed to recover it in some way, or you've managed to keep going and pushing through. And the last thing to say is just knowing which VCs or investors, I guess I put VCs just because I'm one, but which investors are right for you. When you're scaling your business and you're looking for funding, it's really important that you target your VCs, and that can be quite difficult because it's not obvious which VCs actually focus on which areas. But the reason it's really important is more for mental health than anything. If you go to the wrong VCs, they'll reject you, and they sometimes might do it quite out of hand because not all VCs are very nice, which is a problem actually. We can get onto that in another session. And the reality is that there's no point in being told unfairly your business isn't right if it's a great business but it just doesn't fit that VC. So it saves you the time and stress by looking at which VCs to look at. And the best way to do it is websites, Crunchbase, or their portfolios. As I was doing this, I was really conscious that TriplePoint's website is currently down because I'm responsible for updating it. So, not all VCs that don't have websites up are bad. But yeah, so looking at Crunchbase is a great place to look, because VCs will look it up, and Crunchbase is a lot of work, and you can see the themes, the companies, the size of the checks often, or the stage they're at, if not the size of the checks. And then also the VCs specialise in segments or markets or themes. Almost all of them do something to differentiate. I just here one example was our Impact Fund is one fund, or if you've heard of Python Capital, they're all about building marketplaces. So you go to them, or Jamjar, if you've heard of them, they're all about consumer. So going to VCs that specialise is also really good. Even if you don't get the investment, you can potentially learn something from the investors or the partners there, because they just see many businesses. And also the other thing to be wary of is what stage investor you're pitching to. And nothing pains me more in this market than the fact that everybody says they do seed Series A plus. And you're like, what is seed Series A plus? I mean, isn't that just everything? And actually, most VCs say they do seed investing, but they don't. They don't do seed investing. They do seed investing for second or third time entrepreneurs who've exited their business for £400 million. Successful entrepreneurs like Alex Chesterman, who is a phenomenal name in the London circuit. He can go anywhere to anyone and raise money. But if you're a first time entrepreneur or just a less high profile entrepreneur, one should focus on the seed funds rather than the indexes or whatever of the world. The index is a fantastic firm, but you will just find that or Seed Camp, which actually is in this building, I think. They do seed investing really well. And actually, if you want to catch me in the break, I've even got a list of seed funds who we work with, because you've got a lot of syndication in the seed stage. So the key thing to do there is to check Crunchbase as to people say they do seed, do they actually do seed? And likewise with A B plus. And so yeah, that's it. That's really the financial side and what an investor would be looking for when you're scaling your business. Thanks.